If you really want to get the true story on a giant company, you have to look past the fancy commercials and the press releases. Today, we're going to crack open one of the most important and honestly most overlooked documents in the business world, the 10K. And we're going to use ExxonMobil's latest filing as our guide to show you exactly how to do it. Let's dive in.
Okay, so what in the world are you even looking at right now? Yeah, this might look like a total mess of computer code, and well, that's because it is. This is the raw, machine-readable version of a 10K. To you and me, it's basically unreadable, but hidden inside this digital jungle is an absolute gold mine of information about how a company really operates. And today, we're going to go find it.
So that brings us to the big question. What is this thing, and why should you even care? Well, you should care, because this is where the real story is told. Today, we're giving you the decoder ring. We're going to transform all this financial jargon into a really fascinating look inside one of the most powerful companies on the planet.
All right, first things first, let's start with the absolute basics. What exactly is a 10K report? So, a 10K is the legally required annual report for every single public company in the United States. The best way to think of it is like a company's diary. A diary where they are legally required to be completely honest about everything. Their wins, their losses, and their big plans for the future. It's the ultimate source of truth, and we're about to show you how to read it.
So, let's put this new decoder ring of ours to the test. How does a corporate giant like ExxonMobil actually work? I mean, how does it make its money? Well, the 10K breaks it down into a surprisingly simple two-step process. And this is where the 10K is so useful. It just cuts through all the noise and shows you the heart of the business. So first you have upstream. That's all about finding and pumping crude oil and natural gas out of the ground. Then you have product solutions. That's where they take all those raw materials and turn them into everything from the gasoline for your car to the plastics in your phone. Find it, then make it. That's the engine that drives this global behemoth.
Of course, running an engine that big all across the world means you're dealing with a ton of different currencies. So how does a company like ExxonMobil juggle all that financial complexity? The 10K gives us a little peek behind that curtain.
I mean, think about it. This is a massive headache for any global company. If you're making money in euros in Europe, but your shareholders back home want to see profits in US dollars, what do you do when the exchange rate is bouncing around all day, every day?
And here's their strategy, laid out right in the 10K. In places like Canada and Europe, they just keep it simple and use the local currency. But in parts of Asia and Africa, where most of their sales are actually in US dollars anyway, they just stick with the dollar. It's a pretty smart way to sidestep the chaos of constantly changing currencies. And any money they win or lose from these shifts, it goes right onto their main income statement.
Now, to add another layer of safety, they use something called derivative instruments. I know, that sounds super complicated, but the 10K actually makes it pretty simple. Just think of it like financial insurance. They use these special contracts to lock in prices for things like oil or different currencies ahead of time, so they're not totally at the mercy of the market's wild mood swings. It's all about creating some stability in a world that is anything but.
But the 10K isn't just about the nitty-gritty of daily operations. Oh no, it's also where you find out about the real blockbuster, company-changing deals. And this particular filing has a massive one.
$68 billion. Just let that sink in for a second. That is an absolutely astronomical amount of money. So what in the world could a company possibly spend that much on?
That was the price tag to buy a single company, Pioneer Natural Resources, which is a huge player in the U.S. shale oil industry. This wasn't just some casual purchase. This was a massive all-in bet on the future of American energy.
And the 10K gives us the exact date this mega deal became official, May 3rd, 2024. This is where you see the news headlines finally become a reality on the books.
And here's where we see exactly how a deal this big gets done. It wasn't a simple cash payment. The 10K shows that ExxonMobil paid with $63 billion worth of its own stock, and it also took on $5 billion of Pioneer's existing debt. So they didn't just buy the company, they bought all its financial baggage too.
But look, a 10K isn't just a highlight reel. It's not all good news and big deals. It's also where a company has to be brutally honest about the challenges it's facing. So let's take a look at the headwinds that ExxonMobil is sailing into. One of the most revealing parts of any 10K is a section called legal proceedings. This is pretty much where all the skeletons in the closet have to be revealed. And for a company like ExxonMobil, that means talking about the growing number of lawsuits related to climate change.
And here is their official position, word for word, straight from the horse's mouth.
They argue that these lawsuits are, quote, meritless and basically an improper use of the court system to try and force policy changes. This is their side of the story, laid out in black and white for everyone to see.
So what you really have here is a fundamental clash of two totally different worldviews. On one side, you have governments saying, hey, you need to pay up for the costs of climate change. On the other side, you have ExxonMobil saying, whoa, these are political issues, not legal ones, and they should be decided by policymakers. The 10K forces the company to go on the record and defend its turf in these really high-stakes battles.
And that right there is the magic of the 10K. We started with a wall of code that made no sense, and we've ended up with a pretty deep understanding of a global corporation's business model, its financial strategy, and its biggest challenges. The whole story is right here. You just have to know how to read it.
The 10K is such a powerful tool for anyone who really wants to peek behind the curtain of the world's biggest companies. So now that you have the Decoder ring, what story are you going to go uncover? They're all out there, just waiting to be read.